Alexandra Paliy, a Ukrainian historian, political scientist and political consultant, author of A History of Ukraine, a short course.
Здравствуйте, друзья.
Hail, friends. Today, I will try to give you an honest and reasonable answer to this question. Are the Russians the descendants of cannibals? As so many Ukrainians are looking at what the Russians, or the Russian troops, are doing in Ukraine, they can't help but wonder about all these names for the Russians, like āNDROFAGI or āNTHROPOPHAGI, and if the Russians are in fact the descendants of the āNDROFAGI, that perhaps these names are not coincidental but are there for a good reason, that it might not be exaggerated and is more than a historical speculation. What we are seeing is that the current Russian leadership and the Russian army are aimed at annihilating the Ukrainians as a people. We can see this in their executions, atrocities, bombings, in the destruction of civilian infrastructure, and overall in the senseless killings that have no military purpose, but nevertheless are being committed by the Russian military. And hence this question, why all these atrocities? And so much hatred for human beings and the Ukrainians, whom the Russians, in a manner like the murderer Cain, have even been calling a fraternal people in their media until just now. I don't think they are saying it is often anymore. Here, every Ukrainian is overwhelmed with stories that show exactly this bestial essence of the Russian army and the Russian leadership, and the Russians in general, who have come to Ukraine to slaughter Ukrainians. Although the Ukrainians had done no wrong to them, there actually may be some history behind their behavior today. Maybe. Perhaps it is not without reason that St. Petersburg is called a city of dismembered bodies. It is not without reason that in Russia itself there is such a huge crime rate, which on average is 30 to 40 times higher than that in European countries and several times higher than the crime rate in Ukraine before the war. All of this is no accident. Where could it all have come from? Now, about Russian cannibalism. I'm not talking about the individual outrages, of which there is a huge number. There are lots of all sorts of horrible stories you can read. I'm talking about some concrete historical facts that are provided by scholars and found in original ancient sources and so on. So, let's discuss whether the Russians are actually the descendants of cannibals. What do we know from history? First of all, from Herodotus. Herodotus is an ancient Greek historian of the 5th century BC, who described Scythia and its neighbors. Scythia, in his opinion, was a square of about 700 by 700 kilometers, or 900 by 900, up to approximately 1300 by 1300 kilometers, somewhere within these ranges. According to Herodotus, those cannibals lived to the northeast of Scythia, that is, of the present-day Ukraine, beyond some kind of wilderness. To refer to these people, he uses the Greek words āNTHROPOPHAGI or āNDROFAGI, meaning man-eaters or cannibals. Andro is man, phag is an eater. And so, these āNDROFAGI, or cannibals, as it turns out, they neither observe justice, nor are governed by any laws. They are nomads. I am citing Herodotus. And their dress is Scythian. But the language which they speak is peculiar to themselves. Unlike any other nation in these parts, they are cannibals. A language peculiar to themselves means it was not Scythian. And we know that the Scythians were Indo-Europeans, so that language was not Indo-European either. This is very valuable. They dressed almost like the Scythians, looked like the Scythians, but they were not Scythians and spoke a peculiar language. Why is all this interesting? Because the central Russia of that time, the area called Zalesye, or the Transforest colonies of the Kievan Rus, were populated by Stone Age people. In other words, the Stone Age persisted in central Russia. Scythia, for example, had gone through the Bronze Age a long time ago, and earlier through the Copper Age, and the Iron Age had set in, but Central Russia was still in the Stone Age. And in modern Russia, they are finding arrowheads from those times, about 2000 years ago. which were made of bones, not of bronze as in Ukraine, where arrowheads were mainly made of bronze at the time. That is, the Stone Age in Russia lasted approximately 3,000 to 5,000 years longer than in the rest of Europe, including Ukraine. This is a scientific fact which they couldn't challenge even in Soviet times. In fact, it was banned to make sense of it, let alone challenge it, so there was nobody to dispute it. It must be said, for the sake of truth, that the North Caucasus and the southern Urals were no longer in the Stone Age. Their metallurgy was also quite ancient. What are some other facts out there? Here is the 1st century Roman historian, Pliny the Elder, who mentions the *ANDROFAGI, that is, cannibals, dwelling 10 days' journey beyond the Dnieper, which, on average, was about 400 kilometers. Interestingly, Sir Ellis Hovell Minns, a British academic and archaeologist whose studies focused on Eastern Europe, believed that the *ANDROFAGI were probably Finns, and the most barbarous of them, as no trade route passed through their land. Why Finnic? Well, firstly, because that territory was populated by Finnic peoples. Secondly, because Herodotus, who was in Ukraine and Scythia, notes that those peoples, the *ANDROFAGI, did not speak the Scythian language, that is, they spoke a language peculiar to themselves. Just like with the Finns, the Finnish language is different from the Indo-European languages. The Finnish languages are all different. So are the Finns. Same way Ellis Minns believed that this cannibalism was not common among all Finnic peoples, but the most barbarous of them, as he writes. Then there is the 4th century Roman historian Ammianus Marcellinus. He wrote, "The *ANDROFAGI roam about upon different tracts of land, and these men are so avoided, that all the tribes which were their neighbors have removed to a distance from them. And in this way the whole of that region is uninhabited." A very interesting piece of writing, because, if you look at modern Russia, you will see that there are also a lot of lands in those parts that are uninhabited. But the *ANDROFAGI, that is, man-eaters, dwelling in what is now Russia, are mentioned on numerous occasions. As a matter of fact, Armenian geographers, back in the 7th century AD, also mentioned that the tribes of central Russia, or Zalesye, used mainly bone and silicon tools until the middle of the 1st millennium AD. Metals were very rare and were mostly imported. As I already said, there are arrowheads found in Zalesye, even a lot of them, that are made of bone, although they resemble the shape of Scythian trihedral bronze arrowheads. Therefore, a very interesting question is, what is this mysterious tribe, or tribes, of cannibals that were geographically present in Zalesye, which is modern central Russia, some 400 to 700 kilometers eastwards from the Dnieper, northwards and northeastwards from Scythia, beyond some kind of wilderness, perhaps beyond woodlands. In theory, such ancient Greeks could refer to woodlands as wilderness. So, of course, some Russians are most likely to be their descendants. Maybe not all of them. What other interesting source is there, dating those times? There is one quite interesting source. The Acts of Andrew and Matthew in the city of Cannibals, or in the country of Cannibals. The Acts were written in Greek around 400 AD, in the 5th century AD. It's ancient, indeed. As is well known, the Apostle Andrew was sent to Scythia, and this description of his many deeds is a piece of literary writing. Rather than a religious tract, that is, the language there is not evangelical at all, the entire thing is obviously some kind of literary work. And this is what the Acts are about. It's actually about how the apostles Andrew and Matthew, first Matthew, then Andrew, got into this city of cannibals. The people there were given some kind of potion to drink, which was prepared with the help of witchcraft and magic, then tens and hundreds of the people were kept captive, then they were killed, a bunch of them at a time, and they were eaten, and so on. And these cannibals also tortured the apostle Andrew, they dragged him by a rope. To cut it short, they caught him there and he suffered greatly. But the apostle Andrew performed some kind of miracle there and salt water poured out. This water flooded the city of Cannibals, and those who survived begged him to stop the miracle. When he stopped, the survivors accepted Christianity. What's peculiar is that the city's custom was not to bury the dead, but to eat them. And this is exactly what Herodotus writes about some of those cannibalistic tribes. Why is all of this interesting? Here in Ukraine, we can't help but wonder why the Russians would not recognize the basic fact that Zalesye and Russia began as the country of the Merians, specifically. It is because the Grand Duchy of Vladimir coincides with the borders of this tribe. The Merians are everywhere. They are in the chronicles. They are in the etymology explaining the origins of various Russian names and place names, such as Galich Mursky, and there is a huge number of all sorts of villages and settlements outside of Moscow, such as Merinovo, Meridinovo, and so on and so forth. There are lots of them. And so we, the Ukrainians, wonder why the Russians would not come out of the closet. When I read the Acts of Andrew and Matthew in the city of Cannibals, written in the 5th century AD or the beginning of the 5th century AD, I suspected that the Russians simply knew something about their origins, and they by no means wanted to have anything to do with the Merians. They may be aware of something about them very well, especially the Russian leadership, and so they ban any discussion of the topic. I mean, you see the major sources I've cited, and so the probability is fairly high. But I am not saying this is 100%. It is Zalesye about 2,000 years ago. It is most likely that part of the Merians or all of them were cannibals. Does it mean that Russians cannot become human? Of course, it does not. The descendants may evolve to be completely different. Africa used to be different, and now there is a variety of countries that have made great progress. It will also be true that today's Russia, perhaps only 50%, are the descendants from this Zalesye, of these Merians. And there is also the remaining 50% that have completely different origins. So, what am I up to? There is a funeral rite, as it were. To put it in crude terms, no burials are found in Zalesye before our era. That's one of those suspicious things, too. There were such mortuary houses where dead bodies were brought. It was there, in Zalesye, precisely with the Merians. It was very common, and many have been saying that it was some kind of cannibal ritual, those huts on chicken legs and so on. Some believe these to be echoes of those cannibalistic times. Thus, the pieces of the puzzle fall into place to explain many things. Why there are no early burials in Zalesye. You effectively don't find any. Why they were referred to in this way. This city of cannibals in the chronicles of the 4th, early 5th century AD. The name of the city pointing to the Merians. As a matter of fact, this explains very well why Russia's current leadership disavows their true origins in every possible way. You can't even suggest or discuss this may have to do with the Merians. What they are saying is that some Russian ancestors came there somewhere, and all these huge tribes disappeared somewhere on their own. These are the fairy tales that the Russians are told. Of course, there is a reason why they are doing this. Putin, being Vepsian, is also Finno-Ugric by origin. By the way, I once saw a Russian scholar tell Putin that he looked like a Finn during excavations in Novgorod. But he declined that and tried to persuade he was Russian instead. But one Estonian wrote a book saying that Putin is in fact a Vepsian. The book is very persuasive. If you compare the physiognomy of the Veps and that of Putin, you will see that he is no Russian at all. It's not the origin that matters, but what you are now. When today's Russia is committing these terrible atrocities in Ukraine while telling us that they are our brothers, when the big brothers destroy our cities and kill our civilians, Of course, this is worse than cannibalism.